Now, before we get started on our new project, I want to talk a little bit about organization. I've been trying to help you keep your files organized, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that and why it's so important. Right now, I am in my Volusia County OneDrive. And in my Volusia County OneDrive, I have a lot of other junk that I should probably clean up. But most importantly, I have a GameMaker folder. You should have a GameMaker folder in your Volusia County OneDrive. In your GameMaker folder, you should have a folder called Assets. And then you should have a folder for each one of the games we've been working on. Now, we've worked on 3 games, so you should have at least 3 game folders. In your Assets folder, I have organized mine, and I would encourage you to organize yours by game. So I have my breakthrough assets. Those are all the assets I used with my breakthrough game. I have some extras that you probably don't have. I have my open world assets, which again, I have a bunch of extra stuff that I was playing around with in there, but it's all to do with open world. I have my platformer assets, which you should have downloaded by this point. If you have not, you need to go to Canvas, go to Modules, week of January 5th, go to the platformer assignment and download those assets. Then extract that zipped file and save it in your Assets folder within your GameMaker folder on your Volusia County OneDrive. I also have a folder for sounds. If you've downloaded any of those sound effects that I uploaded to Canvas for you to use, I would encourage you to create a folder called Sounds. Later, we'll have a folder called Images. You just want to keep things organized. Like I said, you should have each of the 3 games that we've been working on. We have our first project. We have our open world project. And we have our breakthrough project. What you want to be very careful of is that you do not bury a game folder inside another game folder. So you should not have to come into, say, your first project, and then inside of there you have your open world project, and inside of that you have your breakthrough project. You don't want that to happen. If you get in the habit of burying game inside of game inside of game, 1, it makes files very difficult to find. And 2, you will eventually have a problem with your game, and chances are it will not be recoverable, so you will have to start over. If you have game inside of game right now, I would encourage you to come into my classroom before school, after school, or during B-lunch, and let me help you clean that up. It's important that you keep this cleaned up. So right now, we're going to create a new game. We're going to put that in our GameMaker folder in Volusia County. So I'm going to go into GameMaker, go New, click GameMaker Language, always GameMaker Language. Then I'm going to scroll to my Volusia County OneDrive, and in my OneDrive, I am going to open my GameMaker folder, and this is where I'm going to place it. Now, I'm always naming my games the same way. P, whatever your period number is, I'm using 0, underscore, last name, first name, underscore. So if you just choose one of your old ones, you could just delete breakthrough and write platformer. I'm going to save that here. And now if I come back to that folder, you can see that now I have a 4th game called Platformer. And inside of there, I don't have a whole lot going on right now, but that's because we haven't created any sprites, we haven't created any objects, we haven't added any sounds. So we just have the default folders available to us. Okay, so today I want you to change some preferences. We haven't been changing preferences, mostly because when we change preferences in the classroom, they get held from person to person each period. So whoever changes something in period 1 actually changes the preferences for everyone who sits at that desk for the rest of the day. So in general, I don't want you to do a lot of messing around in preferences. Those of you who are at home, you can experiment, but I would be very cautious about changing something that you don't understand. So make sure you know what things are for before you go changing preferences. However, I do want to change our sprite editor preferences. So we're going to expand the sprite editor by clicking on that little caret. And over here, we get the preferences for our sprite editor. By default, our origin is set at the top left. I'm going to change that to middle center because most of the sprites we're going to use for this game are going to have their origin set to middle center. Then down here, I'm also going to change the width and height. I'm going to change those to 32 so that I don't constantly have to resize every sprite that I make. For the most part, the sprites in this game are going to be 32 by 32. Now I'm going to click Apply and OK to close that. We'll go ahead and create a sprite. You should know how to do this. Right-click in Sprites, Create Sprite. We're going to call this Player, all lowercase. When I've named it over here in the right, and when I hit Enter, it also updates that name in the sprite properties over here. We're going to edit this sprite. Notice it is 32 by 32, and its origin is in the center. We're going to edit this sprite. We're just going to choose a color. Just choose a color for your player. I don't really care. Call the paintbrush. This is just going to be a temporary placeholder for our player. Then I'm going to right-click on player and duplicate and call this enemy. Then I'm going to open that enemy sprite and edit it and change its color again using the paint bucket. Now, this idea of using just generic sprites for our enemy and our player is actually something that is done in the real world when games are created. Rarely does the programmer also determine the art. So the art concept is given to an artist who's working on creating that enemy object, that player object. But the programmer, in the meantime, is just going to create a sprite that is the right size, 32 by 32, and use that until they get the art. So that's what we're doing. We do need one more sprite, so I'm just going to right-click and duplicate one of these again. We're going to call it wall. I'm going to change, oops, didn't mean to do that. I'm going to open wall, edit, and change its color to something not brown. Okay, not brown, because brown will cause us issues later. So just choose a color, just not brown. I'm going to make mine this light green. And then we also want to change one other thing. I said that most of our sprites are going to use the middle center. However, the wall is going to use top left. So we've got 3 sprites, enemy and player, both with middle center for their origin, and wall with its origin at 0, 0 top left. Now, you also might want to check your collision masks and make sure that your collision masks are full. Some of you are having issues with your collision mask, and I haven't quite figured that out yet. But you do want to make sure that all of these collision masks are the full image. If they're not, if you have 4 zeros here instead of 31, 31 over there for light, right, and left, remember you're going to have to first change that to manual and then drag that black box down so that it covers the whole image so that you can have the right collision mask. Okay, So that's our sprites, and I'm just going to collapse that to make sure that I don't accidentally try and put a sprite into my room. I'm going to right-click on Objects and create a player object, obj_player, and choose my player sprite. We're also going to create a wall object, but not an enemy object. So if you've gotten a little bit ahead of me and you have created an enemy object, please delete that. We're going to do our enemy object later, and we're going to duplicate some code when we create it. So I don't want you to create the enemy object at this point. So right now we have 3 sprites. We have 2 objects. We also have a room. Remember, you get 1 room for free. You always get a room. Every game starts with the room. We're going to change the name of that room to level 1. And remember, we do get these 2 layers in our room, and those are also our 2 default layers. And we're going to change this top one, rename that to walls. So we have a walls layer and a background layer. Our background layer, I want to change the color of that to white. So we just click in there, change our color to white. Now our grid is gone. So we're going to change the color of our grid by clicking on this drop-down arrow here. We're going to change the color of our grid to black. Now you can change the alpha if you'd like, if you want it really dark black, so it stands out really well. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave mine around 50. And then I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, make sure that my walls layer is selected, and I'm going to choose my wall object. And I'm going to drag those over. Now, remember, you could drag them one by one, but that is really inefficient. So whatever object is selected in our assets browser, if you hold the Alt key, you can then click with your mouse button to place those objects. Now I'm going to put a little bit of interest in my room, and I do want to have walls on both sides going up so that my player is not able to leave the room left or right eventually. And then I have just a little bit of interest. But then I'm also going to add some platforms that my player can jump up onto. Maybe they can do a little traveling. Get rid of that one. I think I put 2 in this place. Really don't want walls on top of walls. It really doesn't matter, but I try not to do that when I've noticed that that's what I've done. Now, these 3 here, I'm not real crazy about the placement, so I'm going to select this one. That'll show me where in my list it is, and there are 4 of them, so I'm going to hold the Shift key, click down 4, so that I have just those, and I'm just going to move that over this way. Actually, I think I'm going to move it over and down. How about that? Okay, so now I'm happier with that. So there's my walls arrangement. I need to add another layer, which again, you should be able to do. We're going to call this one player. We are going to put this on the very top so that should my player be able to walk over, to walk, so that should I decide to allow my player to walk on the walls, they would be on top of them. Remember, if walls were on top, then the player would be walking behind the walls. I just want a single player object. and I want to make sure it's on the correct layer, and we're going to drop our player here in mid-air. And you'll see why we want to do that in a little bit, but I just want to drop my player here in mid-air, and then I'm going to lock this player's layer so that I don't accidentally put anything else on it. Now at this point we could run our game and it would show our walls and it would show our player, but our player doesn't have the ability to do anything. First we create sprites, then we create objects, we put those objects in the room, now we can run the game, but those objects aren't going to have any abilities until we write some code. So let's look at our player object. Our player object, we're going to add events to. So remember, an event is something fairly significant that happens in the run of your game. So when your object runs into something, we have a collision event. If you're using movement and you're clicking the left and right arrows, we could have a key down or a key pressed event. Lots of different events. In fact, if we look at our list of events, you can see that that list looks kind of small, but when you go over these events, most of them have additional events. There are a lot of events that we can code, and we did code quite a few of these in previous games. This game's going to be a little bit different. But we are going to start out with a create event. And in this create event, we're going to set up our variables. And these will be the variables that we're going to use for player. In previous games, we created a variable called SPD, and we used that to hold the initial speed variable for our paddle or our ball or whatever it was that we were controlling. In this game, we need to control different kinds of speed. So we're going to need an H speed. We're going to set this equal to 0 to begin with. This will be our horizontal speed. We're going to use VSPD, V speed, set equal to 0, to be our vertical speed. Now remember, we're not using H speed because that's a built-in variable, or V speed, also a built-in variable. We're not using those. These are user-defined variables. We'll talk more about variables as the year goes on, and eventually you'll begin to understand the difference between built-in variables that are provided by GameMaker, local variables that are defined by the programmer. We've talked some about global variables. We're going to look at temporary variables. There are different kinds of variables, and variables, depending on what you're using them for and where you're using them, we will use different types of variables. But we have these two user-defined variables, HSpeed and VSpeed. We're also going to use GRV. We're going to set that to 0.3, and that is our gravity. We're going to have a walk speed. We'll set that equal to 4. We're going to have a jump speed, and we'll set that equal to, let's use -5. And those are all the variables we need, at least for now. So we've got horizontal, vertical speed, we've got our gravity, we've got our walk speed and jump speed, and those are the variables that we need, at least at the moment. Now again, I could run my game, but it's not going to do anything because even though I've declared these variables, I haven't used them. So we're going to add a step event. And we have used step events in the past. We remember that a step event fires 60 times per second. And in this game, our step event is going to pretty much run all of our player movement. So this is going to be a little bit different. In previous games, we have coded key down left, key down right, key down A, key down D. So we had all of these key down events for movement left and right. We could have added up and down, but we ended up with a lot of events with a little bit of code in each event. In this game, we're going to code most of our actions in the step event. So we need to make sure that the step event is very well organized and very, very well commented. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up variables for left and right movement. Those variables are going to be called key underscore left. Again, a user-defined variable, not a built-in variable. And for this, we're going to do a keyboard underscore check for the virtual key left, which is the left arrow. Now, I'm just going to copy that because I do a lot of copy and paste. The less I have to type, the better. I have a tendency to type poorly, especially when I get in a hurry. I'm just going to change this to key right, looking for the right arrow. So there's my left and right movement. Now, keyboard check is checking to see if the left arrow is being held down or not. So if it's held down, it's true. If it's not, it's false. Now, actually, it doesn't hold the word true or false. It holds the values 0 and 1. 0 when we're not holding the left key, and 1 when we are holding the left key. So key left will hold one of two values, 0 or 1, and key right will hold one of two values, 0 or 1. Next, we're going to calculate movement. For that, we're going to use a new variable type. We're going to type the word var, and then we'll type our variable name, which will be move. Now, this is a temporary variable. Like I said, there are several different types of variables, and this is a new one for us. And what this is for, the difference between these variables, we'll figure out later as we get a little more programming under our belt. But move is going to be calculated by taking key right and subtracting key left. So let's stop for a minute and think about what kind of values move is going to hold. So key right holds either a 0 or a 1, and key left holds a 0 or a 1. If we're holding the right key, we'll have 1 minus 0 is positive 1, so move will hold a positive 1. If we're holding the left key, we have 0 minus 1 is negative 1, so move will hold a negative 1. Positive values when we're moving to the right, negative when we're moving to the left. If you happen to hold both the left and the right key at the same time, we'll get 1 minus 1 is 0. They'll cancel each other out, and move will hold the value 0. Then we need to calculate our HSP. Our HSP is going to be calculated by using move times our walk speed. So remember that our walk speed we set as a default of 4. Our horizontal speed in that case will either hold 0 if move is 0, positive 4 if move is 1, or negative 4 if move is negative 1. So HSP is going to hold 0 when we're not moving, positive when we're moving to the right, negative when we're moving to the left. Under that, we're going to need VSP, And for VSP, well, this is just going to be adding gravity to our current VSP. So we're going to write VSP equals VSP plus GVR, which, remember, we could also write VSP plus equals GRV. And those two statements would be identical. Now, I don't really care whether you write the plus equals or you write equals VSP plus gravity. It doesn't make any difference to me, but one or the other, just not both. Then we're going to go ahead and move horizontally, and that would be X plus equals HSP, or you could write X equals X plus HSP, and we're going to move vertically using Y plus equals VSP. Okay, well, let's run this and see what happens. Remember, you should always code a little, test a little. Oh, my test didn't work too good for me because I fell all the way through that wall. Okay, well, what caused that? The down movement, that was caused by this calculation of VSP plus gravity. So I've added gravity to my VSP, and then I've added that VSP to Y. So let me comment this out. And now I won't move down, but this will allow me to check my left and right movement. So moving to the right with the right arrow, moving to the left with the left arrow, I can go all the way through those walls. I can go all the way through these walls. That's really not my intention, but I haven't fixed that yet. So I know that left and right would work. And I know that this moving down will work if I fix my collision. So what I want to do before I move horizontally, I want to make sure that it's okay to move horizontally. So above that horizontal movement, I'm going to check for horizontal collision. Again, we could be using a collision event, but we're putting all of our movement into the step event. We'll talk about why a little bit later. So in order to check for horizontal collision, check is an if. I need to look to see if I'm going to use place meeting, which you can choose here. Notice it has 3 parameters, X, Y, and the object you're looking for. So my X location would be X plus my HSP. Is it safe for me to move that far? I'm not looking horizontally at all, so I'm just using Y for my horizontal. And what I'm looking for is a wall. Now, remember to be careful of parentheses. So I have an open parenthesis, I have one close, I need a second close, and no semicolon. No semicolon at the end of your if statement. I'm going to go ahead and put in my curly braces. And if what this is asking is, okay, look to your left or right, depending on if HSP is positive or negative, and see if there's a wall. And if there is a wall, this will return true. If there's a wall, I don't want to move. So I'm going to set my speed to 0. But if there's not a wall, this would return false. So we would skip this if block and go down here. So either we're going to set HSP to 0, and we're not going to add anything to our X location, or we're not setting it to 0, and we're either moving left or right for, depending on what was set up there. We'll do the same thing for moving vertically. So I'm going to duplicate this because it's very similar. And I'm going to place that above my Y change here. I'm going to update my comments. We're going to look for vertical collision. Instead of changing X, we need to change Y. And instead of changing HSP here, we'll set VSP. So again, what we're looking for here is, can I move on the vertical direction? This, whatever value is stored in my VSP, which will either be positive or negative, depending on if we have jumped, which we haven't talked about yet, or if we're dealing with gravity. If it's gravity, then it's positive. We're moving down. Remember that moving down on the Y is positive, the opposite of geometry. And if it's negative, we'll be moving up. Well, we don't want to move down through our walls. So if below us there's a wall, this will say true. We'll set that VSP to 0. If below us there's not a wall, then this will be false. We'll skip this if block and just go ahead and move. If we're moving up, same thing. You shouldn't be able to jump up through the bottom of a platform. So this will take care of that when we get around to jumping. Okay, well that takes care of our collision. So let's run our game again. Always code a little, test a little. My gravity brought me down. I can move right, I can move left. It stops me at the walls. Okay, so all of that's working really well. Now we just need to add jumping. So in order to jump, we're going to need one more variable. So we're moving up here to the top where we've set our variables for left and right movement. And we're going to add and jumping. We'll add a new variable. We're going to call this key_jump. Keep your variable names similar so that they make sense. I'm going to copy that keyboard check right there. I'm going to move it down here, and instead of left or right, we're looking for the space bar. Now, keyboard check is a continuous event, just like KeyDown when we were coding the events. So if we were adding this as an event, we would add it as a KeyDown event. Here, we would add a key press event because we don't want our user to be able to spam the space bar and jump really, really high. We just want them to be able to jump, period, and we are determining how high they can jump. So we need to change that from a keyboard check to a keyboard check pressed. Now, if you select this from the drop-down, you get an extra set of parentheses because it's telling you that you need it, but we already have it. So I just need to delete those 2 parentheses so that I have my virtual key space inside my parameter list for my keyboard check space. And that's my key jump. Now, before I move left or right, I need to see whether or not I want to jump. So there's my calculating movement. I'm going to leave that there. Underneath of that, but before my horizontal collision, I'm going to check to see if I can jump. In order to jump, I should be standing on a wall. And I need to have hit the space bar. Okay, so I need to look for a wall beneath me, and I need to check for the space bar. So remember, questions are if statements. So I'm going to write if, and what I want to do is look beneath me. So we've been using this place meeting. Place meeting, that works really well. So I'm going to copy this place meeting. I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to look 1 pixel below me, not left or right, so just X, but 1 pixel below me. That's Y plus 1. And what I'm looking for is a wall. So if there is a wall 1 pixel below me, then I'm standing on the wall. But I also want to know if we've hit the space bar. So I use 2 ampersands, meaning and. Remember we talked about and. And means that both of these conditions have to be true for this if to fire. So I want this to be true, standing on a wall. And I want to make sure that we have pressed the space bar. So we're going to look at key jump. Now, key jump will hold one of 2 values, either a 0 or a 1. 0 is considered false, 1 is considered true. So we're just going to leave that as a Boolean value. So that when we have pressed the space bar, this will say true, and we have not pressed the space bar, this will say false. So if we press the space bar and there's a wall beneath us, then we can go ahead and jump. And what we're going to do is set our vertical speed equal to our jump speed. So remember that jump speed, that's that variable that we set over here in the create event. So our jump speed is negative because we're jumping up. Our walk speed is positive, but our jump speed is negative because we're jumping up. So we're going to set our vertical speed to that negative number, negative value of 5, instead of whatever we have set it up here to a positive value for gravity. So gravity is positive, that takes us down. Jumping is negative, that takes us up. So let's run it. Brought us down, hit the space bar, and we jump. Not very high. That is not very high. So I probably want to jump higher than that. So I'm going to close this and come back to my create event. I'm going to change this to maybe 10. Run it again. And we jump. And that's probably a little too high. So I'll go back and I'm going to set this to 8. See how that does. I need to be able to jump onto my platforms, but I don't want to jump so ridiculously high that, you know, it takes me forever to go up and down again. I just want to make sure that I can jump, that when I fall off of a platform, it takes me down. When I fall into a crevice, it takes me down into my floor. And there we are. That is part 1. So if your player is not moving left and right, is not able to jump, notice I can actually move in the air by clicking my space key and holding my left or right arrow button. If you're having problems with that, make sure you go back over the video and fix anything that you have. For example, if you're not jumping, one of the most common issues is to set gravity to 3 instead of 0.3. Gravity needs to be a small number, 0.3. The smaller this is, the slower you will fall. The larger it is, the faster you will fall. So if you wanted to adjust your gravity a little bit, don't go overboard on this because you're going to be working on this game for a while and you can make adjustments later. But you should have a decent jump rate, you should have a decent walk rate, and your gravity should be around 0.3. Once you get all of that working, make sure that you get my attention so that I can come and grade it. This will become your first formative grade.